Good. Good evening. I call this meeting. Good evening. I call this meeting to order at 6:16 p.m. Welcome back, everybody, to our first school board meeting of the 24-25 school year. Tonight we have present directors Teitler, DeFreitas, After, Director Ramirez is joining us on Zoom, and myself, meaning we have a quorum. Thank you to our interpreter. Astrid, would you please share the interpretation instructions with our participants, and then we can turn on the interpretation function. The first business in order is the approval of the agenda. Directors, are there any proposed changes to the agenda? Seeing none, do I have a motion to approve the agenda as presented?
I move that we approve the agenda as presented.
Is there a second?
I second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Motion passes. You've just approved the agenda as presented. Our next agenda item is our opening celebrations and updates by our superintendent, Dr. Anna Cole.
Good evening. Well, welcome back to the 24-25 school year. Welcome to the 24-25 school year. I think that in terms of celebrations, one of the things we're really excited to launch is our next 5-year strategic plan. So if you all remember, the priorities we'll really be leaning into are around students first, rigorous instruction for all, operational excellence, student-centered partnerships, and a thriving team. So we'll start to provide a regular cadence of updates for the community, for board members in the coming months. And that work's kind of settling in and taking shape. And we're really excited to be really aligning our work to those priorities, and then making sure that we're holding ourselves accountable with the metrics that we've developed through the build out of the strategic plan. New face on our senior leadership team. We're delighted to welcome Christy Chacoin as our new Chief Financial Officer. Christy most recently worked at the town of Carbondale and the town of Basalt, but served what we were really interested in, as well as her service to Garfield RE2 School District as CFO for over 17 years. Chief Chacoin brings a wealth of experience and commitment to public service and this particular office. Her priority right now, our priority right now in terms of finances is to make sure that she has the time to familiarize herself with existing systems and structures. And then we can really lean in to really align the work with that strategic priority of operational excellence to increase transparency, accuracy, and accessibility of financial information for our stakeholders. So really delighted to welcome Christy here. And you'll get to know her more in the coming weeks and months. Also celebrating that schools are back in session, and we know that folks are working through their routines, kids and staff and families, and working through strengthening their immune systems. That's definitely a part of the work right now. Really want to welcome new school leaders this year. Lindsay Henschel as new principal at Roaring Fork High School, Jamie Hozak, principal at Basalt Middle School, Eric Olson, principal at Glenwood Springs Middle School, and Scott Anderson, assistant principal at Glenwood Springs Middle School. Laura Smith and Courtney Rangel are also interim leaders at GSES this year. So really grateful and delighted to welcome all those new leaders. We also have, as you all know, this year, we are also celebrating that with the Learning Acceleration Plan that came out of COVID a few years ago. That work was scaffolded and rolled out over a series of years. And so 24-25 school year marks where we have staffed deans of culture at all of our middle schools and high schools. And so we're delighted to welcome back returning deans and some of our new deans to that work at the middle schools and high schools. Our staff have shared that as always, the first few weeks of school are a lot in terms of energy, stamina, and of course your immune system, and it takes a toll. But generally speaking, folks are reporting that this has felt like a really strong and stable, solid start. So really kudos to Assistant Superintendent Park and her team in terms of supporting and really prepping schools and leaders and staff for a really strong start to school. We are already right into the routine and cadence, as you all know, with our commitment to labor relations. We had new H policies last year. We've started a formal classified IBB process. We've tightened our processes around administrative IBB, and our certified IBB process now has a labor relations committee that meets monthly, as do admin and classified IBB. All of those monthly teams have met already. At the start of the school, the first meetings, the intent was really to align on process, calendars, focus areas, I've been really impressed at the productiveness of these teams. Folks are really coming together with a problem-solving spirit and a commitment, right? All these representatives who are serving on these committees are doing it in addition to their other roles in the district. So really excited to be launching that work with routines and consistency in terms of labor relations. A couple of other celebrations in terms of operational excellence, which we really have our eyes on and will for the next 5 years. I want to celebrate our HR and our finance teams. Chief Chacoin was part of this. Chief Platt has been part of this. That our summer payroll, kind of July and August, are massive because we have a lot of new folks and new contracts and new salary schedules. And the teams this year had a 50% reduction in errors over last year. And so really showing what continuity and continuous improvement is doing. So huge kudos to those teams that worked really hard to decrease errors in payroll. I know that can kind of seem kind of boring sometimes, but it really matters that we are paying people correctly. We also had a huge lift in terms of operations that we moved a key financial system called Infinite Visions that our schools use, that all our departments use to manage budgets. We moved that to the cloud. It was a massive kind of upgrade process and we got through it with definitely some hiccups, but grateful for the teamwork, flexibility, and collaboration of all those teams, especially the problem-solving work from our tech team. There's a lot of celebrations, y'all. It's just an exciting time of year. We are delighted to realize something that's been in the works for over 2 years, which was bringing together the Growing Years Preschool and the Basalt Elementary School early childhood programs. And under the leadership of Adele Melnick and Liliana Olmedo, the staff of both of those teams coming together, the kids and the parents who are learning new systems, they've had a really quiet launch. It's been strong, it's been solid, and I think we can be really proud as the Roaring Fork Schools that we're supporting now the largest early childhood education center in the Valley and the one that truly reflects the linguistic, cultural, and socioeconomic diversity of our community and our district. That is really big work. It's been phenomenal from everyone involved. So lots of celebrations there. And importantly, a big thanks to Eric Willis and the facilities team. You know, part of that transformation was really to make sure we had upgrades in terms of our usage of space and security and safety improvements. And the new Eric Willis led a redesign of the entrance security to the Red Brick Building and the security systems that are much more dialed in, very comprehensive, and really, I think, reflect the levels of our commitment to safety and security for our littlest learners. So lots of thanks to Eric Willis and his team. We are going to kick off. So parents, I know there's a lot of family members and stakeholders here tonight and tuning in and listening. I want you to mark your calendar for September 10th. That is the night that we will be kicking off 2 of our key district family partnership, family engagement committees and advisory councils. So on December 10th, our district accountability committee will be meeting at 6 p.m. Those meetings are always open to everyone to join and learn about the district accountability committee. That same night at 5:30, our family advisory council that is meeting at 5:30, also here in this building. So keep an eye on the community newsletter that's coming out next week with more information about those meetings and how to connect. September 10th, lots of accountability and family councils. So that night will be a great kickoff for that work this year. Want to also celebrate Amalia Sparhawk, who is an 11th grader at Roaring Fork High School. She, this is really new to us. I think it's new to the region. She's been selected to represent Senate District 5 on the Colorado Youth Advisory Council. So she will be, I think it's a 2-year commitment, a 2-year term that Molly is going to be serving as part of a team of student representatives across the state who regularly report to the state legislature. And it's really exciting that we have somebody from the Roaring Fork School District representing the Senate District and engaging at those levels. So you will all get to meet Molly. She's going to join our board directors, Glenwood Springs Elementary School students, Glenwood Springs High School students for Monday, September 9th, when the Colorado Association of School Board hosts their legislative bus tour. So Molly and some other leaders, student leaders from Roaring Fork High School, some of our students from Glenwood Springs High School will be working with the legislators who are here for that school tour. For members of the community, you'll hear more about the legislative bus tour that the Colorado Association of School Board is hosting. They're coming to the Roaring Fork schools. We're really excited to help have the legislators and their aides get to connect with our students, with our staff throughout that day. That'll start at GSES and end here at the district office. So more information about that will be released here in the next week or so. And it'll be a great chance for some of our students get to connect. Finally, want to celebrate and really lay the foundation for the work that the board's doing around policy. So last year, the board, with support from families, from students, from our Equity Advisory Council, developed and passed the first equity, diversity, inclusion, and anti-racism policy and regulation for the Roaring Fork schools. That was an achievement and accomplishment that we were really proud of in itself last year. But what I want to report to all of you on and celebrate for our entire community is that part of that policy and regulation requires annual training related to the policy. And so once that was passed, the Equity Steering Committee, which is made up of staff, developed a training that we call the ADB Close Read training. And at the leadership kickoff in late July, the Equity Steering Committee provided that training for all of our department heads, school leaders. And then the expectation has been that those department heads and school leaders will take that training to their staff and their teams and complete it before Thanksgiving. The majority of our schools and departments have done that work. And it's been an incredible opportunity for us to establish common language, common understanding, common awareness of the expectations that the board has for the district in terms of meeting those commitments. And it really, I think, shows the power and impact of very thoughtful, collaborative work developing policies and the impacts that that has moving forward as we go to implement those. So I know we have a lot of policies on the agenda tonight, and we'll have a lot more this year, but want to start with that celebration because this is really meaningful, powerful work. So that's a long list. Thanks.
Thank you for that. The next business in order is a superintendent presentation from Anna Cole and Chief Park that will provide updates on our equity audit, student fees, and student attendance.
Okay, so for tonight's superintendent report, we have a couple of quick hits and then some time for discussion. One of the initiatives connected to our strategic plan and also a resolution that the board passed last year was, and also tied to ADB, policy ADB, was the directive for the district to complete an equity audit that would be conducted by an external independent auditor on a 5-year cycle prior to the development of the strategic plan. As you all remember, that commitment that we wrote into the policy was meant that because we hadn't done it before the development of our new strategic plan, we would have to kind of wait another 4 years to do that work. So the board passed a resolution directing leadership to schedule an equity audit out of cycle that would happen this year. So want to update, and then in that resolution, the board highlighted 4 areas that would be focused on in that equity audit. So we issued an RFP early last spring, worked through an evaluation process with the proposals that we received. We've made the decision to move forward and have a nonprofit organization, an independent auditor, Promise 54, be the partner to conduct that external equity audit for us as a district. There's links. You can learn more about Promise 54. This work will kick off in about 2 weeks. We're targeting a December 20th completion date for the audit that will culminate in a presentation to the board and the community by Promise 54. We will hear a lot more once this work kicks off, we'll hear a lot more about stakeholder input sessions, interview opportunities, because a lot of this work and the auditing will have lots of opportunities for community and stakeholder input. So that's all coming. One of the components that I want to make sure that the board is aware of, that our community is aware of, is that the resolution identified 4 focus areas. In the work that we did with potential partners, it became really clear pretty much across the board that one of those components that was really focused on student achievement and programming to support emerging bilingual students really felt outside the scope of the vast majority of folks who responded to our RFP. And they felt like, you know, we're really good at addressing these other areas of staff diversity, recruitment and retention, equitable allocation of resources, policy regulations. But this piece they really felt was outside their scope. And the recommendation we heard again and again was that if you're interested in that, you should look at a program review and doing a comprehensive programming review. So want to let board directors know and our community know that we are going to take that recommendation and we will turn that push to have an external audit. And we'll turn that into a formal CLDE program review. If in our mid-year amended budget, we can identify that we have funding to get that work started in 24-25, great. If not, we'll bake that into the 25-26 budget for completion. Although we can certainly move forward on RFPs and kind of contract setup this spring for that work. So just want to let everybody know that that's kind of where we're at on the equity audit. I think what we are really looking forward to, and one of the pieces that Promise 54 brings is incredible strength in terms of talent work. And so they are considered some of the foremost experts around staff diversity, recruitment, and retention in the public sector and for schools. They were absolutely the strongest in their expertise in this area. And because of the needs, I think that we've really identified in our strategic plan, a lot that we've heard from stakeholders about the importance of recruiting and retaining a staff that reflects the diversity of our students. This felt like a really great match with Promise 54. So really looking forward to working with them and doing this work. Okay. Another update that I think is important for our schools and community is the rollout of the school fee parameters that the board has approved. As you all know, based on board policy, the board has to approve every fee that we issue to kids and families or to families. And so the board revised and updated the school fee parameter document and approved it last spring for the second year in a row. If you all remember that the new revised school fee parameters were really designed to improve clarity, consistency, transparency, equity, and really help us move closer towards fair and appropriate program funding. And some of the technical components meant that we were moving towards a flat materials, activities, and program fees for our schools, that we were going to develop a consistent fee waiver process for families who were who are living below or whose income is below the federal poverty, the established federal poverty level. That used to be called kind of FRL, free and reduced lunch eligibility. Now it's determined through a new form that we call the FEDS form, or through direct certification that's connected to Medicaid and TANF and WIC programs. So the school fee parameter implementation, we have a timeline of how that work happened. The initial approval by the board was in the spring of 2023. Last year, we had only partial implementation of the plan. The board reapproved it in the spring, and in the summer, we had a lot of shifts. So the new FEDS form was released. We were also, we were inconsistent in our school-based communications at the end of the school year. The district released some communications over the summer. And there was a lot of processes, kind of technical, internal, external, that needed to be ironed out over the last couple of weeks in terms of communications with families. Where we are moving forward with this is we're where we needed to be in terms of 100% implementation of the plan across our schools. In terms of that goal and that was related to consistency across the district, we didn't quite achieve it. We still have variation in the high school fees that are being issued. And where we're really trying to head toward with this work is trying to explore how we can, as a district, allocate funding to our schools that ensures that kids in every classroom have the materials that they need, have the supplies that they need, and that our schools have appropriate discretionary budgets to do the activities and field trips that fit their program model. And we're trying to really, in a lot of ways, our schools have used school fees to do this. And we would like to move back and move away from that and to, instead of being able to do these things and have materials because of the contributions of our families, to better allocate resources to our schools to get away from that. So that is something that we will be looking at as we move into budget options in 25, 26, 26, 27 to see if we can use this more consistent allocation to get out of the school fee business entirely. Is where we're trying to go. So a couple of key takeaways from the rollout of the school fee parameters. I think before the school fee parameters, what we saw was that allowing the schools to kind of do pretty much whatever they wanted within some boundaries around school fees led to real inconsistencies across the district in terms of what we were doing. And it also created deeply held, I think we underestimated how deeply held the cultural practices were in our schools and communities around fees. And I think another big takeaway from this work is that when we shifted to this standardized system, it took a lot more training and planning than we anticipated. 2 years in a row, I would say we underestimated really, truly how much training and planning and communication this would take. Another thing that we learned is that reiterated that communication with our stakeholders, especially around this, required and didn't always get consistency, alignment, and use of appropriate channels. So some of the initial information that was pushed out about this from the district came from social media, which is not a key line of communication for us. It's a nice form of communication to celebrate some things, but it is not a central communication channel for us. That was a big miss. And so we made a lot of mistakes through the rollout of this, and it's really challenged us to tighten our communication and how we think about these sorts of systems overhauls. I will say one of the benefits of the new school fee parameters and the challenges that we have faced is it's really forcing us all to look at and question, I think, a cultural practice that, again, was very different from school to school around school fees. And it's forced a lot of us to ask, I would say, school leaders and parents and families. We're having really important conversations about why are we in the business of this? What is this funding actually funding? Is that core programming or not? What do we really need? What is our obligation? What is considered materials, especially as we move into a very digital world? What does it mean to have an equitable funding system? And how do we really partner with families when it comes to systems change? And so there are really, I think, valuable conversations happening through some of the tangled up mistakes and missteps that we've made in this work. And I think another takeaway is that there's still a lot of work that we have to do around equitable allocation of resources, especially at the high school level. When we're looking at our high schools and their budgets, and the fact that our largest high school, Glenwood Springs High School, can do the work they want to do with less reliance on school fees than what Basalt and Fork can do. To us, that raises a lot of questions about how we're funding and allocating resources to our schools and addressing economies of scale, and how we're aligning on practices. So lots of work to do here, lots of good learning. We're still trying to iron out pieces around some of these missteps, but just wanted to kind of give you a follow-up on where that is currently. Okay. Student attendance.
Good evening. I'm excited to give an update on student attendance. It's everyone's favorite topic, next to school fees, I think. But I first want to share just our approach as a district as we think about student attendance. And so first, we've talked about this before, attendance really matters, and time in class really matters for student achievement. If the students are not there, then they are not able to participate in the learning. For safety too, students and families, or for schools and families, we need to know where their child is and that they're accounted for and during the school day. And then just having some alignment around absence. So if parents are aware of the absence and the school needs to know why, for a number of reasons, including tracking illness, any state reporting, planning for extended absences or access to resources. And then finally, I'm going to talk a little bit more about chronic absenteeism. And one of the key approach that we take around attendance and absenteeism is a commitment to learning about the root cause of absences and providing differentiated supports to families as they need them. Generally, our practice is I'll talk about this in a second, but our practice is to recognize positive attendance and celebrate it. And when a student is absent, we lead with curiosity to find out more and offer support and determine how the student will access learning. You might remember that we established an attendance plan to better implement board policy JH, also to ensure that we have more accurate data and ensure that we do engage in a root cause analysis and establish targeted supports. Here on this slide, you can see the average daily attendance rate for the past 7 years, including this past year. So it ranges between a little over 90% to 93.3%, and which gives us an average of 91.9% over the past 7 years. We're much closer, if you look on the right-hand column, at 92% for 23-24 to our pre-pandemic rate. It's not yet to our goal, which is 96% average daily attendance. So we're still working on that. One thing I did want to show and show this again, and you've seen this, is the year-over-year comparison by month for our average daily attendance. So over the past, in 22-23, our average daily attendance was 90.9%, and we ended 23-24 with a 92% average daily attendance, which I always say 1.1 percentage point, it might not seem like a lot, but it's actually pretty significant. And I'll talk about why that is. But for every month, with the exception of September and January, our attendance for that month compared to the previous year was higher. You might recall January 18th, I think it was, we had a delayed start, which actually, we had a lot of absences, and that pretty significantly impacted our attendance. But a big celebration is that you can see the year over year by month improved a lot. And that's, again, due to the really strong and concentrated work by our front office specialists, our school leaders, our teachers who checked in on students, our family liaisons who provided supports, and just wrapping around and everyone just understanding the importance there. I want to talk about some key terms that might be helpful to understand. These are used by the state, and I'll talk a little bit about our district data for 22-23 and 23-24 compared to the state. You can, as a district, we have a higher attendance rate than the state average. So 92% average daily attendance rate versus the state, which is 91.5. And that attendance rate is calculated by the total days attended divided by the total possible days for each student. So if you're a parent and you know that we have a 172 day student contact days, then you can calculate that as well. But I have some numbers here. Once a day is missed also, we can't make it up, right? We have a finite number of days. We're not going to add days at the end of the year. And so 1 day absent is 99%, 3 days is 98%, and so on and so forth. So a 96% average daily attendance is missing only 6 days of school. And I don't want anyone to take that to say, great, I have 6 days to play with, but just because I know kids get sick and things like that, but 6 days ends up being 96%. If you look here at the it's both a celebration and a continued push at the chronically absent rate. The chronically absent rate refers to the number of students who miss 90% or more of days enrolled in the school year. And so in 22-23 as a district, we had 33.9% of our students who had 90% or less average daily attendance. And the state average was 31.1%. Sorry, not average, the state percentage. And in 23-24, we reduced that to 26.8% of students having 90% or less attendance, which is still high. We are now lower than the state, which is good, but that's still a push for us. And that means like 90% attendance means that that student has missed 17 days of school, which is 3.5 school weeks. That's an entire math unit or reading unit, literacy unit. And so it's pretty significant. Our truancy rate, which is students who have 4 unexcused absent days in 1 month or 10 or more unexcused absences in a year, is significantly higher than the state at 4.1%. So we've reduced one rate, which is a chronically absent rate, but our truancy rate is still high, is higher than in the previous year. So that's something that we're continuing to work on. So in short, attendance is still very much a focus this year. As you know, our goal that we had set was ambitious at 96%. We're still holding that as our goal, even though we are at 92%. We are higher than last year, and we're continuing to push so we can get closer to that 96%. We'll continue to communicate expectations and value of regular school attendance. We'll celebrate positive student attendance, do some education, even just hearing the numbers like, oh, 6 days, that's what it is. Sometimes really helpful. Then we'll continue to monitor, intervene, lead with curiosity, and make sure that we have appropriate supports for families.
Thank you.
I don't know if there's a
I think
Q&A.
that's the end.
Okay, it's time for questions.
So we'll now go around and each board member will have 2 minutes to ask questions. And we'll start with Director DeFreitas.
Just going back, Dr. Cole, to the discussion around school funding, through the lens of equitable resources, right? And the definition of equity that we support in the district too. I'm interested. how do you see that with other fundraising efforts within each school? So school fees being implied mandatory, I suppose, and fundraising is purely voluntary, but often used to support projects and activities that are important to those unique communities that each school is in the center of. So I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that.
That's a great question. I will also defer to Chief Park on this one as well. You know, I think at the end of the day, we have an obligation to provide a free and appropriate public education. And we, the way the Roaring Fork Schools is set up is that we provide some autonomy in the program model that our schools identify, like choose dual language, expeditionary learning, outward bound. Those programs sometimes have different costs and the interests of that school community in terms of what they want to do and those programming decisions have some definitely have some restraints based on how much funding we allocate to them in terms of what's possible and what they can do. And you're right that a lot of our schools do rely on quite a bit of fundraising. I find that's hard, right? Somebody's got to plan that. That's time that administrators are not working on student growth and achievement and supporting great teaching. That's time that teachers aren't working, doing the job that we've hired them to do because their eyes are on fundraising and other projects. And there is incredible, I think we've seen, and our schools have done a really good job trying to identify fundraisers that also have the added benefit of community building and bringing people together. But I think it's an odd tension between funding schools equitably and appropriately, and also allowing, some wiggle room for schools that want to go out and do other things and be creative or innovative. And our schools definitely rely on fundraising and our education foundations and other grantors to do some of this creative work. And I think some of the challenges that we're grappling with is what is core programming and how do we define what is essential to a programming, what is nice to have, and then what is really helping to drive us towards the goals and initiatives that we've named as a district and as a community are most important. And so I'm grateful, again, that a lot of this work on school fees is forcing us to have some of these conversations about why are we doing this and to what end and what is the cost in terms of both financial resources, but also human resources of time and energy and expertise. I don't know, Chief Park, there's anything else you want to add?
Yeah, I feel like it is a difficult line to walk, but that I think it's critical to make sure that fundraising activities that increase community interests and parent buy-in and the ability of, like I said, we're not all the same communities, Glenwood to Carbondale to Basalt. There is different culture, there is different interests and activities. I think we need to make sure that whatever we're doing to support equitable core programming doesn't prevent creative involvement from our stakeholders and families.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you.
Director Tyler.
Thank you for your presentation on the equity audit and information about the RFP. And I understand the reasoning behind, and I think it's important that if we weren't getting companies who were giving back in areas in which they're able to help us with a CLDE program review, that we take that away. But I feel like we need to get that done this year and not put it off until next year. And I don't feel comfortable at all waiting another year to do that. I think if budget's a problem, then we need to get creative with the budget and figure out a way. We have contingency money from Meadowood that we're talking about waiting until we get some kind of program review happening for housing, that we have the money there if we needed to get the money. But I don't think money needs to be a reason for us to say we're not doing this review now. It's is struggling and something that we cannot wait on, and we need to get that done now. And so I hope we hear back that yes, that can be done now. And if not, then I think our job will be as a board, or I would hope I would have the support that our job would be as a board that we ask that, yes, this gets done now. So I appreciate it being taken off for the reason that it is, but I feel very uncomfortable waiting to have that done. Yeah, thank you.
Director After?
Great, thanks. I second what Director Tyler said about this CLDE line item and that equity audit. That seemed like a big potential outcome of the audit, so I was surprised to see that taken out. On the school fees, I'm still confused, even though I know I voted to pass it last year. Are schools asking, now that we've paid the fees and we have this flat fee structure, what is a parent supposed to do when a school says, hey, we need $50 for your kids to go on a field trip, which happened to me this week? Are we supposed to pay those?
So the way that the school fee parameters are set up is that those fees, that $90 fee should cover $90 for elementary and middle school,
Mhm.
$180 for high school, should cover any sort of materials, supplies, consumables, and activities. Some of our schools' budgeting has had some of those costs, like for example, there's some schools that have a big trip
Yeah.
at the culminating year
Yeah.
that is currently not been budgeted for in this model, right? In theory, let's say you have a 5th grade trip at the end of elementary school that's going to cost a lot of money. In theory, the way this should work is then that kinder class starts building that towards so that night, because the way the board wrote it, it can't go over 90. And if we have a big field trip planned, then we would make sure that that class of 2025 started building that field trip plan early. Not all our schools are there yet. And so I do think there's still this gray wiggle room in terms of how those are working this year and probably for the next couple of years, as we have schools that have these commitments to pretty significant field trips or activities that are beyond what that combination of, the activities and supplies covers. And so I think that in the spirit of where we're headed, we're trying to get to a point where those kind of additional fees for significant trips or big adventures would be baked in and planned for. But I think as we transition to this flat fee structure, it's going to require schools to do a different type of budgeting to build up to that. And so I do know that there's some areas where we're still seeing a little bit of that. And I would encourage families that are concerned about that is going to become a burden to definitely check in with their school. Because there always still needs to be processes to scholarship. But I think that for a lot of schools that have these very kind of traditions of large expeditions, the school fee parameters is not giving them quite the on-ramp to build up to that yet.
Okay, got it. That makes sense.
Mhm.
Thanks. I had a similar question to what Director DeFrady said. About fundraising, I guess, or a comment, it definitely feels like fundraising is part of a culture of a lot of the schools, as is classroom specific fundraising. I can't think of the name of the platform that donors choose, as is the sense that the schools themselves don't have enough resources. And yet I've heard before in finance committee and other conversations that in fact, the schools often end the year with balances. And so do you know yet, or when will we know which schools have money left over from last year, or does that zero out? And if so, I just think that's a good thing for the community to be aware of, because we've created this culture around fundraising and constantly having to go without, and teachers are paying for things out of their own pocket. And I think this is all part of this conversation around school fees, and it would be good for the community to understand, is the district supporting schools, or are we asking schools to do all this fundraising and then the schools go ask the communities to do fundraising on their behalf? It feels like there's quite a bit of a mismatch between reality and perception.
Mm-hmm. I agree wholeheartedly, and think that a lot of our goals this year in the strategic plan and some of the work we even started last year around school resource allocation, a focus area of our equity audit is really around how are we being clear, more transparent about that. In terms of what the schools carry, yes, their activity funds, which kind of operate outside of the general fund. And that's where fundraising dollars come in. That does carry over. And we've really pushed, with the board's direction over the last couple of years to saying to schools, like, the intent of that fundraising, the intent of that money was to serve the kids that year. And we did have some pretty large balances. I don't remember specifically where the number of what was being carried over in the activity funds was in the budget, but I'm pretty sure it was there. I can follow up with you on that. I would say that in a lot of ways, one of the avenues for, and again, we have a lot of work to do on just better telling this story of how we allocate resources to our schools. And I think we have a lot of grappling to do with, as Director DeFreitas brought up and you're bringing up, what's the role of fundraising, and are we properly funding our schools to provide a free and appropriate public education along with the program that they've adopted, that we've, in theory approved because of certain standards. And I also think that there is an accountability component that families absolutely could and should be looking at as part of their school accountability committees. The role of those committees is to look very deliberately at those school budgets, at those activity fees, and to help provide input to school leaders on what those activity fees should be used for. And I would say, a school accountability committee is only as good as the folks who show up and ask good questions. We have some amazing folks, and we have some we call them SACs. We have some school accountability committees that are incredibly, I would say, experienced, informed, and working in a really collaborative relationship with their principal around those activity funds. In some cases, really making strong recommendations on where those go. And so I would definitely encourage families to get involved at that level. Our school leaders are looking for that kind of collaboration and input and accountability at the school level. And then I think our challenge, especially as I see as our senior leadership and some of the goals we have around transparency and finances is how to better bring you budgets and transparency around this, because those questions you're asking, like, I don't have immediate answers to.
Thanks. Director Ramirez, you need to turn off mics.
Ready for me? All right. Good evening, everyone. I apologize for not being able to be in person. Thank you to the team for making that possible for me to join online. First and foremost, thank you to Chief Park and Superintendent Cole for the accountability from the get-go on the rollout of our school fees. I think that was something that was very important that this board stressed, that we wanted to make sure was easy and successful. And I think there were a lot of growing pains, but I really appreciate that we were able to learn from it. Because I think that really does matter, that we learn from every opportunity we can to do better next time. So I appreciate that first and foremost. I also just want to echo the sentiments from Director Teitler. I understand that this was something that, in conversation with Promise 54 and other companies, that this wasn't something that they felt could be in their scope. But I do understand the need for it as well, as a director and as someone who's been part of this conversation. And so I just want to make sure that we keep this top of mind and that we don't lose sight of what a true equity audit would look like in our school district when we are a 60% Latino majority school district. I also just wanted to mention student fees. I mean, I hear the conversation on fundraising. I do want to say that I think that fundraising has looked very differently within all of the schools, as we've all acknowledged, but it's also felt very differently for families. And I understand our want to make that conversation around how schools fundraise and, what that looks like, what that feels like for families. And I would push us in finance committee to really go over those numbers of each school and what their balance was. Because I do think that we've stated this before, that we hear two different stories. We hear obviously that, you know, staff is using their own funds to pay for pencils, and then we're hearing this other story from our district that actually the school has extra money in their account. So I think, you know, in the spirit of accountability, it's really important for us to pursue that and to really understand what that budgeting looks like for each school, and also where that line item falls within our budget. And also the fact that I think we've all recognized that not every school has a SAC that is not only inclusive, but that is representative of the demographics. And so I think that's a conversation we need to continue to have as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Ramirez. I also would echo Director Tytler's position. I think that this was a critical piece of the equity audit, and I'd like to see it done sooner than later within the constraints given. So I don't think that's a surprise coming from this board, but just to echo that. My only question is about student attendance and how we communicated this again this year with school leaders, specifically around differentiating between excused and unexcused absences, because that's often what we hear about as a board, and what kind of guidance was given either to front office staff or leaders or whoever it might have been about how to classify absences.
Yep, I can answer that. So we directed folks back to policy JH. We pulled out those reasons and then actually gave explicit examples and talked through where in the past, right, it was loosely implemented, not as tightly implemented. And so just having some just understanding there too. And so it's reiterating all year and continue to it this year, those same pieces in terms of coding excused and unexcused.
And was that done with leaders or front office staff or?
It was all of them.
Okay,
Yep.
awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. That's all I had. So we have 5 minutes of open board discussion. If anyone has anything else to add.
I think just piggybacking off what you were saying, Director Kuhlenberg, I know at least at Carbondale Middle School, it trickled down to the teachers, and in their orientations with parents, there was a handout to talk about excused and unexcused absences. So I know at least the process was in place to make it down to the parents and the students. So, and then I would like to ask just a follow-up question about the CLDE program review. If there were money available, what would you imagine a timeline, or where do you stand in the process for how you would be able to implement next steps in that process?
Yes, and you can, we'd write up a new request for proposals and we build out more details, specifically that component for CLDE. We'd post it and probably reach out if we know of organizations that run them. We'd have to, I guess we've done a couple ways where we said this is the max of our budget, or we've asked groups to propose what they were proposed in alignment with the RFP and see what the cost is, do interviews, determine what's the best fit.
So that could be something they could get rolling quickly.
With developing the RFP, probably it is a longer process to find the right person. And then I think the budget is a big thing. I mean, this could range from $30,000 to $100,000. So depending on service or the organization or the parameters of the RFP.
And I would also name, I think money is absolutely part of it. I think another piece is the human capacity in terms of like writing RFPs, evaluating RFPs. Chief Park is supporting a SPED program review that was part of our budget and part of our work that's kicking off this fall. The equity audit work, I am the point person for that. We don't have a robust staff. And so, those weekly meetings with Promise 54, organizing community input sessions, that's my work. That's going to be Chief Park's work. Like we don't have The data dashboard's also a big piece of kind of some of these additional initiatives that at least the two of us are driving right now. So part of it is trying to time, right? Like that, if we can get that equity audit done by December, awesome. Then I should have some bandwidth to try, to support our CLD department to get that program review out. So I think it's balancing both of those and how many of these can we run efficiently, effectively, and frankly, with the appropriate time invested in community input. Like we know that community input for especially those three, an equity audit, a special education program review, a CLDE program review, those programs are lived and experienced by our students and families every day. And we have got to do a really good job of making sure that we are talking to the right kids and families through those processes. And that just takes time, and it takes humans to make sure that we're getting that together. So I think those are the things that we would need to balance in addition to the budget, that even if the money's there, we got to make sure the human capital's there to do it right.
Yeah, I just wanted to say two things about the attendance presentation. One is congratulations on increased attendance percentage over the year. And then my question is, do we have data on absences in neighboring school districts? Is that public information or is that not available? I'd be curious what Aspen and our other neighbors have in terms of their daily attendance rate.
It is publicly available on the CDE SchoolView websites, and it was all just released, I think, publicly within the last week or so. There's a ton of really amazing resources that the CDE has pushed out, the Commissioner of Education has pushed out in terms of looking at attendance statewide with the release of all the district data. And so it is available, and let us know if you could use some support on those click paths, but it's all there.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments from the board on this?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify about the school fees. I'm not interested. I wasn't trying to direct anyone to pursue anything that would hamper buildings' abilities to support the unique culture and activities through fundraising, as long as all students have the ability to access it free of charge, which for the most part I've seen consistent in all buildings. I don't think that we can put any further constraints on that activity when we live in the state of Colorado that consistently underfund schools. So I just wanted to clarify that. Thank you.
Great, thank you. At this time, we welcome members of the public who have signed up to address the board. There are 4 speakers signed up tonight. The board allots 45 minutes for public comment. To respect the time of all who are present, speakers are asked to limit their remarks to 3 minutes or less. A reminder to all speakers to uphold our procedures for public comment. We ask that you be thoughtful and constructive with your comments, and thank you in advance for sharing your feedback. Members of the public who wish to share their views with the board may always do so in writing at any time. For this evening's public comment, we've received 1 written comment. Tonight, our first speaker is Autumn Rivera.
Good evening. My name is Autumn Rivera, and I'm a 6th grade science teacher at Glenwood Springs Middle School, starting year 20 in the middle school, which is a little crazy. I just wanted to take a moment just to just share out some awesome work I've been doing. In 2021 of October, I was named the 2022 Colorado Teacher of the Year, and since then have been able to do a lot of advocacy work. The district has been awesome in supporting me through this, and so I felt like it was only fair to come and just show you the awesome work that I've been able to do through this support. The district has graciously offered me 5 flex days throughout the school year to use to support this, and so that combined with personal time myself, I've been able to do a lot of different work that I just wanted to take a moment and share with you. I've been able to do some presentations with different Roaring Fork School District teachers. We've presented at 2 different national conferences. I myself have also presented at a couple of national conferences on my own or with other teachers from around Colorado. Those include the international conference that is the Society for Technology and Education. That was the ITSE conference in Denver this year. I presented with Paige Hahn from Carbondale Middle School. I also was able to present at the National Network of State Science Teachers Association, which was also in Denver. A lot of conferences were in Denver this year, which was really helpful. I've also been able to do some advocacy work. I presented I presented to the House Committee and the Senate Committee to talk about with the governor, worked with the governor's office to pass a bill, House Bill 1446, which is providing more funding for science education, for providing for teachers and professional development. So I was able to advocate for that work at a state level. I've given some speeches. I'm keynoting at a couple different events and being part of that. I'm also on a couple different boards. I am on the Carnegie Educators Advisory Panel. I get to work with Dr. Cardova at the state level with CDE. I also am at a couple different national committees and have been able to do that piece. Looking forward, I'm keynoting the Colorado Association of Middle Level Education in Fort Collins. I'll be part of that piece, and just have really enjoyed being able to do this work. And I'm very grateful that the district is supporting this, and I look forward to continue doing that work for years to come. And so thank you so much.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Rosalba Tellez.
I will speak in Spanish, and then when I finish, he will do in English, because it's my mother language, and I feel more comfortable. Muy buenas tardes, miembros de la mesa directiva. Mi nombre es Rosalba Telles. Soy madre de un exalumno de Roaring Forest School District. He vivido en este valle por más de 17 años y mi hijo pasó por toda su educación en este distrito escolar. La razón por la que estoy aquí es porque el distrito escolar le falló a mi hijo. Y ahora mi familia está pasando por un momento muy difícil que no quiero que otras familias experimenten esta misma situación. El distrito escolar le falló a mi hijo porque ningún maestro, consejero o administrador pudo brindarle el apoyo que él necesitaba en su discapacidad para salir adelante en su educación. Él estuvo en educación especial desde el 6º grado y hasta el senior year. Las necesidades de mi hijo fueron muy claras, pero todo el personal docente simplemente las ignoró. Debido a esta falta de apoyo psicológico y al acoso que mi hijo enfrentó debido a su orientación sexual por casi 4 años en la High School Glen Springs, le llevó a lastimarse y a sentirse indigno de estar vivo y pensar en el suicidio. Lamentablemente, esta situación es causada por un sistema que no tiene el apoyo necesario para los estudiantes latinos, inmigrantes o con necesidades especiales. Mi historia y la historia de mi hijo no es una historia aislada. Es algo que se repite continuamente. Se ignora continuamente las necesidades de nuestros hijos y ya es tiempo que el distrito escolar tome responsabilidad por las fallas que están impactando a nuestros hijos y a la comunidad. Le pido al Roaring Forest School District que no solamente tomen la responsabilidad, sino que también tomen acciones contratando a maestros, consejeros y administradores bilingües, biculturales y con más capacidad que puedan entender las necesidades de la población estudiantil latina. La cantidad del personal del distrito escolar no está alineado de ninguna forma al crecimiento estudiantil y esto impacta a nuestros hijos en el apoyo que reciben y el rendimiento escolar. Mi hijo es inmigrante, es latino, es una persona con necesidades especiales y es miembro de la comunidad LGBT. Y así como mi hijo se merecía haber recibido el apoyo que nunca recibió, les exijo a la mesa directiva que trabajen en apoyar a los estudiantes actuales. Hoy hace 61 años, Martin Luther King Jr. dio su discurso I Have a Dream y este sueño persiste hasta el día de hoy. Soñamos que la brecha del apoyo entre la comunidad latina y anglo se elimine y que la discriminación sea borrada de nuestro distrito escolar. Muchas gracias.
Good afternoon, board members. My name is Rosalba Telles, and I am the mother of a former student of the Roaring Fork School District. I have lived in this valley for over 17 years, and my son spent his entire education in this school district. The reason I am here is because the school district has failed my son. And now my family is going through a very difficult time that I don't want other families to experience the same situation that we are going through. The school district failed my son because no teacher, counselor, or administrator was able to provide him with the support he needed in his disability to get ahead in his education. He was in special education from 6th grade through senior year. My son's needs were very clear, but the entire teaching staff simply ignored them. Because of this lack of psychological support and the bullying my son faced because of his sexual orientation for almost 4 years at Glenwood Springs High School, it led him hurting himself and feeling worthy of being alive and thinking about suicide. Unfortunately, this situation is caused by a system that does not have the necessary support for Latino, immigrant, or special needs students. My story and that of my son is not an isolated story. It is something that is continually repeated. The needs of our children are continually being ignored, and it's time for the school district to take responsibility for the failures that are impacting our children and the community. I ask the Roaring Fork School District to not only take responsibility, but to take action by hiring more bilingual, bicultural teachers, counselors, and administrators who understand the needs of our Latino student population. The number of district staff is not aligned with the student growth, and this is impacting our children in school support and performance. My son is an immigrant, is Latino, is a person with special needs, and is a member of the LGBT community. And just as my son deserved to have received the support he never received, I urge the board to work in supporting current students. 61 years ago today, Martin Luther King Jr. gave his I Have a Dream speech, and that dream persists to this day. We dream that the bias between supporting the Latino and Anglo community will be eliminated, that discrimination will be erased from our school district. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Katia Gonzalez.
Good evening, members of the board. I am delighted to be sharing space with you all tonight. My name is Katia Gonzalez, and I work for Voces Unidas as a parent organizer. My role in Voces Unidas is to organize and mobilize local Latina and Latino leaders and parents to change inequitable systems, in this case, systems that impact their students. As a first-generation Latina who is an alumna of the Roaring Fork School District, I profess the Roaring Fork Valley as my home. The Colorado River and the mountains of our home hold memories of my upbringings. As the 2024-2025 school year begins, it is important we recognize that 60% of the Roaring Fork School District is composed of Latino students. Yet on average, Latino students are 2 grade levels behind in important subjects like math, science, writing, and English. The challenges that Latino students face today are similar to the challenges Latino students faced when I was a student in the Roaring Fork School District. The quality of education of Latino students has not improved enough from when I was a student in the Roaring Fork School District. This should be a clear indication to everyone that there are systematic issues we need to address and fix. Voces Unidas de las Montañas demands that the Roaring Fork School District creates a plan that will address 3 key areas. We demand a plan that will aim to reduce the academic gap in the Roaring Fork School District. We demand a plan that will transform and increase Latino parent engagement. And we demand a plan that aims at recruiting, hiring, and retaining teachers and administrators that reflect the student population. Each of these plans needs to lay out the necessary timeline, goals, metrics, resources, allocation, and community feedback in order to be successful. This task will not happen overnight, but if we work together, the outcome will be greater. As an organization, we take a stand for the children and members of our community. As an individual, I take a stand for my family, who are part of the 5,846 students that the Roaring Fork School District is serving. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Our fourth speaker is Alan Munoz.
Hello, members of the board. My name is Alan Munoz Valenciano. I'm regional manager for Voces Unidas de las Montañas, a nonprofit organization based here in our valley. And our goal is to elevate the voices of Latinos and Latinas in our community. And today I'm here to remind us about how much work we had ahead of us still. We have been very clear to what our demands are and where we stand in as an organization and as a community. What we still don't know is where this board and this administration stands on these demands. We need to know if this board and this administration agree that a 40% achievement gap between white students and Latino students is an issue. We need to know if this board and this administration agrees that a lack of Latino parent representation in decision-making spaces across the schools and across the district is an issue. And we need to know if this board and this administration agree that Latino teachers only representing 13% of the total number of teachers in the district, as opposed to the student population that is 60% of the district. If you do agree, then you must develop a plan to each of these issue areas, because clearly what has been done before has not worked. We have yet to see any detailed plan that have these specific elements that we are demanding and asking for. However, if you do not agree and you don't think that these issue areas are impacting our students' educations, also let us know. By letting us know, we as an organization and as a community can proceed with the next steps to make sure we have a board and an administration that is aligned to the needs of students of this district. We do not want to waste our time reminding you of what these demands are. We would much rather work with you to create the solutions that our students need. However, if needed, we will demand for a new administration that is aligned with our community and with us. And we will work towards electing a new board that wants to see this work happen and will push for it as well. We cannot expect that Latino students will magically start to do better academically, or that Latino parents will all of a sudden be part of committees across the district, or that bilingual and bicultural teachers will jump at the opportunity to come to our valley. That can only be achieved by comprehensive plans that will challenge the status quo and transform the way the Roaring Fork School District operates. Will you or will you not develop these plans? Our community deserves to know where this board and this administration stands. Thank you.
Thank you. The next business in order is the approval of the consent agenda, which includes routine personnel and minutes from our previous board meeting on June 26th. Directors, are there any items that you would like to pull for separate discussion and vote? Seeing none, do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I move that we approve the consent agenda.
Is there a second?
I second.
Please call the vote.
Director After,
Aye.
Director Ramirez,
Aye.
Director Kohlenberg.
Aye.
Director DeFreitas,
Aye.
Director Teitler.
Aye.
Directors, you've just passed the consent agenda. The next business in order is discussion on policies AC, GBAA, JBB, regulations AC-R-1, AC-R-2, and AC-R-3 and exhibits AC-E-1 and AC-E-2. Each board member will have 2 minutes to share comments and ask questions, recognizing that this is a pretty large book of policies and updates. If you need additional time, please let us know. And also on AC during policy committee, just as a point of clarification, we propose that a clean copy be presented to the board because the edits recommended by CASB to get us in alignment with law were so vast that the edited version was very unreadable. We'll begin with Director Tyler.
Thank you. I do have a couple questions. First of all, in many of the policies that we saw, it has a preface, like in sort of the beginning of the policy, it says the district should consult with its own legal counsel to determine appropriate language that meets local circumstances and needs, as opposed to what CASB is offering. And as my first question is, have we done this and have we talked to our council about that? And what did the council say?
We have known that these revisions were coming for a long time. And so we've been in conversation about the implications of the new state statute on our policies, and especially in terms of, I think for us, often we're very interested in on the protocols and implementation of them. And so we have absolutely been talking to council about this work. Specific to the language in the policies, no, not yet. But we absolutely have been working with council in terms of implementation of this.
In ACR1 on number 4, the number 4 part of it, and I can let you get there, but it says the question is, it talks about the informal complaint resolution. And in the second paragraph, it says 6 or 7 school days. And I saw in all of the other parts that you had changed those ones that had said that to a specific number instead of a range. And maybe that would be one more that you want to change that to.
Thank you.
And then much the same as maybe the question that Director Kuhlenberg was asking earlier on attendance, how will these new policies on harassment be rolled out to teachers? I know like this is usually done sort of like in a first week of school thing where there's some signing off and you get training and then teachers sign off. Is this something that's going to be done throughout the year? Is this waiting until next year that we do this? How's the plan for the rollout on that?
That is a great question. And I don't know that we've fully fleshed it out yet, to be honest. You're right. We typically do this training at the beginning of the year with pretty explicit check, accountability components to make sure that folks have done it. We're going to have to still sort out the rollout and the significance of the changes in this work are predominantly around what happens after complaints are filed. And so a lot of the training that we do for staff is not at that level of detail. That is really the work that happens once things land with our compliance officer. So we're going to have to audit to really see if these changes, kind of substantially change the existing training.
Okay. And then on ACE2, I was confused by especially the part that about civil complaints and the form to fill out. And then the footer of it, it talks about the school's district food and nutrition service department. And like it's a form specifically for the Department of Food Services. I take it that's not the case. And
it's like a whole different, like complaints related to that program have their own protocol.
But was that specifically to that program then? Because like it didn't seem headed that way. I didn't understand. It seemed like it was an overall district plan. And then at the bottom of it says, direct your complaints to this department. Here's the phone number. And then it goes on to the Colorado Department of Nutrition. It just seemed like it was beyond nutrition.
My understanding interpretation of this is that it's basically naming that anything that's related to that you're right. This form is for kind of your general harassment concern. Like this is the exhibit for those. And I think this note you're seeing is because it's trying to name that if this is related to something within that department, those are all the steps that'll happen and the levels of escalation that'll happen because that's a parallel process.
So but when I'm reading that and my interpretation, if I'm trying to fill out that form, that's where I'm turning it in. And it didn't also seem like there was any like instructions or how do I turn this form in? Who do I turn this form into? Where does this form go on that paper?
On this one. Okay, yeah, I mean, I think the previous protocols explain it, but you're right that if somebody's going straight to this or we're linked to this, I don't know that it says that it has to go to the compliance officer. So that we can add that.
Okay.
You know, so that is, I just want to make sure I'm hearing you correctly. So that it would be something to the effect of like, upon completion of this, submit to.
Yes, something like that would be great. And it seems like that footer should probably just be gone on that form.
I think we have to include it in the event that there is something specific to food nutritional services to.
So could that say something like, if this pertains to food and nutritional services? It just seems like, because the way I would read it, that's where I would turn it in, no matter what it was. Thank you.
Dr. After.
Thanks. This was quite a deep dive for our first meeting back. So I had one detailed question and then one high level question. I'll ask the detailed one first, which is, I didn't understand. So in the first policy, AC, it talks about bullying as being student on student behavior. And then in the subsequent policy, harassment investigation procedure for students, AC-R-1, I couldn't tell if that's where a student would go if they were being bullied by another student, since it defines bullying in the previous document as being student on student behavior. So if a student's being bullied in school, are they supposed to follow the procedures outlined in ACR-1?
If the bullying is based on a protected class. So if it's bullying, you know, per that first definition, oral expression, physical, electronic act or gesture, and it has nothing to do with the student who is the victim of the bullying, has nothing to do with a protected class, then we're moving into the kind of bullying prevention education, intervention steps, procedures, disciplinary processes. But if the bullying is based on anything that's defined as like protected classes, then we actually move into a different level of protocols that really are moving into anti-discrimination.
And how would how would a parent, like, let's say it's in the case of a young middle school or elementary school child, how would they be expected to know about this policy or this process? Is the school directing them?
So a lot of the components in these policies then require the administration to develop training for kids and training for families on how to actually live this world. And so it's through that work and that education and that bully prevention education that we would be articulating the differences. And through the these policies also require training for students on recognizing and reporting harassment and discrimination. And so that would be the lived utility of this. And so these are the kinds of things that need to show up in, say, a student and parent handbook in a much more accessible, directive manner.
I see. Interesting. So big picture, I understand these are many of the changes here are CASB driven and compliance driven. Is there anything you want to flag for this board that is a shift beyond a regulatory or compliance change that you think we might want to be interested to see, but is actually buried in this legal language?
That's a great question. And I would love to provide some space for Director Kuhlenberg or Director Ramirez, because we talked about this a lot on policy committee. You're right. We kind of picked up the recommendation from CASB and we're like, that's it, state statute, drop it in. And I think a lot of the reason that we felt and discussed in policy committee that it wasn't as tailored to the values of this organization. We felt in a lot of ways that the work around ADB last year really stamped that. And so with the nudge and recommendation from Directors Kuhlenberg and Ramirez, you see that addition of that sentence number 2 that really frames that the values of the district and the board are reflected in a lot of ways in ADB. And I don't know if that
In AC, the second sentence in AC.
Second sentence of AC. The board had done significant work on this policy a year and a half ago, being our only non-discrimination policy that was on the books. And since we were able to get ADB through and officially passed, we felt that that really contained a lot of our district specific values and stances related to non-discrimination and equity. And almost all of these are statute driven. Like if you look at the bottom to the statutory references, they're
Right.
30 plus. And so there's really not a lot of space to adjust the language within these. Like all the definitions are taken directly from statute.
Thanks.
Director Ramirez?
Thank you. I just wanted to make sure I gave everybody time to mute. And to Director After's question, we did include language in there. I believe we added policy ADB links at the bottom. So we wanted to make sure that those were referenced for future use. And at this moment, I don't have any questions, but I just wanted to echo what Superintendent Cole mentioned, that we did have a conversation during policy committee just to really understand and to make sure that we were aligning the values of this policy to what already existed.
Is that it?
Yes, sorry. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Director DeFreitas?
So my two questions were sort of both what Director Tytler and Director After were bringing up. One was the legal review. I mean, my take on any of this is pretty pointless if it hasn't already met the standard that we're required legally. And then the other part was fishing out, where do we have discretionary power as a board and where is it just this has to be in here? And I think as we up the number of policies that we're focusing on each week by a significant amount, it's going to be really important to flag those for us intentionally. So I'm just saying what was already said there. And then of course, also making sure that the staff and leadership throughout the district is aware of the shift in the pace of these policy approvals, and that they might, that you might consider, if you haven't already, giving them access to a similar table that you have for us in the staff memo, where you have a column that just says description of updates. And again, just identifying this is a substantial change. This is a required by law change, so that, you know, with the limited time that these professionals have to just focus in on what it is, one, they can impact, and two, that's going to impact them significantly. So just thinking about how to sort of triage the time and resources as we send out significantly more information. So those were my comments.
And those staff memos are available to the general public via the board agenda that is sent out the Friday ahead of every meeting. And it would be good to make sure that we include those when we do include in the staff newsletter, the little board section, like the board is working on these policy topics. Here's the staff memo to that. I think that would be a great way to link it up so that people aren't having to navigate board agendas. I don't have any additional questions on these right now. I think what we hit on in policy committee was that we wanted a cleaned up version so that we could get any additional staff input. And I did see some staff edits and not seeing any additional ones to consider. I'm assuming that staff looked at it again and didn't have any other insights. These policies, regulations, exhibits were all super prescriptive. So I didn't have much to add. We have 5 minutes of open discussion now. If anyone has anything else on all of these policies that I will not list again.
Just back to the point that Director After was naming and the difficulty of reading CASB suggestions. And it's hard for me as a layperson to like read that and think, oh, I think we should do this differently. And so I just guess I would ask in policy review before we get to these, if it would be possible for you, where the notes are on the edge of the page, to maybe make some comment of like, this might be an area that we were looking at changing and would like your opinion on, or something, because it's hard for me to go through and really think like I could say something and I would probably be told, no, from a lawyer point of view, this is the reason. And so sort of
Sorry.
to define my eye as I'm looking at it to see like, where should I be paying attention to those policies?
I think generally we try to do that this was definitely a unique set of policies and regulations and exhibits that we reviewed during policy committee, and that both Jasmine and I were like, well, this is all very prescriptive, and from staff side, same thing, very prescriptive. We expected all these legal changes, and I said, I remember working substantially on policy AC not that long ago and making it very Roaring Fork specific, but we have to now. Well, we opted not to reincorporate that again because we felt that it was held in ADB. And so we didn't feel like it was a worthwhile exercise to go through and adjust the preamble language in AC to reflect all that again. And that's where we put that
Right.
sentence in and the cross-reference.
Dr. Ramirez has her hand up.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I thank you, Director Taylor. And I think that that is something obviously that I've shared before, that it's really hard to get these recommendations from CASB and try to make them fit our school district. And we did talk about that during policy committee, but I think ultimately we just felt like this was something that, like Director Kuhlenberg said, it was very prescriptive, and we knew that it had to be added. And at the same time, we're willing to hear back from Superintendent Cole and staff, if there was any additions that they felt were missing or were needed. But I hear you on us moving forward with policies, and if there were any sections that we felt the board should be aware of communicating that out before our board meetings. And then the follow-up question that I had that sort of escaped me when I heard the echo, I just want to ask, and I know Superintendent Cole, that we put it in here, at least I remember we did, but who's in charge of the accountability for making sure that we are adhering to making sure that our staff is having updated harassment investigation procedures?
Great question. Ultimately, that's me. And I delegate that to our chief of HR, Begonia Platt, in terms of, we kind of divvy up, again, ultimately it's my responsibility to implement and develop a plan to implement and execute on policy. But the way we kind of organize a lot of the policy responsibility across our senior leadership team is a lot of, the employee, a lot of these pieces fall to Chief Platt. A lot of the student instructional pieces fall to Assistant Superintendent Park. A lot of the facilities fall to Chief Operating Officer Ben Baumfox. So we kind of distribute it that way. One of the things that Jonathan Landon has really helped us do this year is he really got very particular in assigning specific policies to those leaders. And we were tasked this summer with reviewing all those policies and identifying where any policy would say something like, need to report to the board on insert topic here. And we then baked those reports into that annual perpetual calendar for board members as a reminder to make sure that we were supposed to report to the board annually on that safety plan. When is that going to happen? Great, put it in the calendar. So we further took those steps in terms of that kind of accountability, baked it into our calendar. I would say similarly in terms when we were doing that same work, we were also then kind of internalizing then great, what needs to be in the employee handbook, what goes in the parent handbook, what do we need to clean up on the website? So that process of kind of owning that really helped strengthen that accountability. I also think this is that accountability as well.
I move that the board approve the Colorado E-Trans 2024 school district resolution as presented.
Is there a second?
I second.
We'll now have 2 minutes discussion for each board member and 5 minutes of open discussion, and we'll begin this round with director after.
I don't have any questions on this.
Director Ramirez,
No questions, thank you.
Director DeFreitas.
I just had a question about using this. Can you remind me what the precedent is within our school district for having accessed this type of loan in the past? And then is there a limit on the number of times that school districts would be able to take advantage of this?
I don't have the history around how much we've used the program, so maybe Superintendent Cole could answer that part of it, but there's actually it's one time a year, and usually this is passed around the budget time, and then you have another opportunity during that year to look and see if there's any other needed changes to your cash flow, which we will be doing this year, and then pass any resolution during the year. But you can continue to use this program as needed. So there's not any limit. Like if we do it this year, that doesn't mean we can't do it the next year. Yeah.
And I would say, under Chief Markham, we never used this. I know that, we've definitely consulted with former Chief Financial Officer Nathan Markham and former Chief Financial Officer Shannon Pelland on this. Certainly Shannon Pelland was familiar with the work. I'm not sure if we ever utilized it in the past. And the reason we included that graphic for that local share versus state share shift, it was really to stamp the significant change that's really caused us to need to access this resource. And so definitely not during Chief Markham's tenure did we use this, but it's a pretty standard tool across the state of Colorado. We're definitely in a different world in the way our cash flow works based on where we're generating revenue that's necessitating us shifting into this.
So then let me just say it in my dumb layman's terms and make sure I'm understanding it. Sorry. We need to access these funds because with local funds, those tax revenues don't come in at the beginning of the school year, but they'll be delayed and we won't see them until spring. And so this is the gap, knowing that they're coming. And this is just the filler.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
That's correct. I did a review of that, and it looks like about 80% of our general fund revenue is from that property tax, which is very seasonal in nature. And you would have to have an 80%, a very high fund balance to be able to fund that with your cash flow. So, so otherwise you have to use the state loan program in the interim.
This doesn't impact our credit borrowing rating or anything in that manner?
No.
Not sure what even that would be for us, but it sounded like an important question in my head.
I think it's, I think your fund balance is more something that's going to impact your rating, because that really is an indicator of the health of the organization on your general fund. Yeah.
Thank you.
Director Tytler.
First of all, welcome Chief Chicoine. And glad to have you here with us. I do have a couple of questions on this, from the E-Trans. So if we sign up to do this, we will be getting tax-free any of the money that we need to be able to pay those bills while we're waiting for our funds to come in. Is that how I'm understanding it?
Yeah, it's an interest-free loan.
Interest-free loan.
Yeah, so it's no cost to the district.
And so Chief Chicoine, or maybe yourself, Anna, that maybe one of the two of you could talk about what's happened in the past. Because I remember having a conversation with former Chief Markham and sitting in his office and asking him about that line in the budget. And I was understanding that we had money there as a budgeted amount of money, and that when we weren't using it, we were getting interest on that money. And so if we had a line item in the budget for that, what is happening to that money now, and how is that being moved if we do move to this E-Tran?
Not 100% sure on the line item you're referencing that would be funding that we would have.
Because in the past, we had to have money for that. So I thought in our general budget, we were keeping a surplus within our general budget to be able to fund that.
You mean fund the cash flow, you mean?
Correct.
Yeah, because we haven't taken a cash flow loan for at least 5 years, so that would be correct. And so then what we would be able to do is the positive thing about that is that you always have a cash balance you can then invest. So you have some interest earnings, which are revenue that's brought in. So under this is that we have to be really tight with our, how we handle our cash flow. So there will be certain times where we're still going to get our interest earnings in when we have a positive balance. And then when we're taking the 0% interest-free loan, then that's when we're not going to be getting that interest earnings. Maybe
I somewhat understand that. I'm going to try to phrase it in a different way
Okay.
if possible. So we had maybe 10% of our budget as this is our cash reserve. But I thought on top of that 10% cash reserve, we had another 1% or 2%, or I don't know what the percent was to cover what E-Tran now is going to be able to do for us. And if we did have that extra budgetary money in reserves to be able to cover this, what are we earmarking that money for now? And how would it just go into building up our reserves, or is that freeing it up for something else?
I don't know if this is quite going to answer it, but let me try. I think probably what we were able to invest previously had to do with the fact that what was it? I'm looking at the chart. More than 50% of our revenue coming from the state was coming every single month. And
Right.
so we had that. The state's not contributing that same amount anymore. And so, the way they disperse money is a check every single month. And so because more of what we were generating was coming from the state, we had that monthly payment was higher. Now it's going to be much lower, and we won't get we won't get our fill of the total program funding until local taxes come in the spring. And so my guess, and I'm not 100% sure about what that fund looked like or what Chief Markham would have been noting, but my guess would be that it has to do with the fact that that monthly payment from the state is going to be dramatically reduced for us.
I'm not doing a very good job, I don't think, of communicating. So if it's okay to take another minute to try to flesh this out. I'm understanding that E-Tran is going to be covering that gap that before we had to have for ourselves. And I understand that that gap is now bigger with the increased part of the taxes that we're responsible for before the state fill. But it is my understanding that we did at a point have money in some type of budget to cover that missing amount that we would have in a budget, and then we would later be earning interest on. And my understanding now is with E-Tran, we're no longer going to need to have that because the state is going to be supplying that tax-free money to us.
Can I ask a related question just to make sure I'm clarifying what you're talking about? I know you mentioned the 10%, and I was wondering if that was related to the minimum fund balance in the general fund.
Right. So
Okay.
I was, instead of just trying to say
Yeah.
an amount, because I'm not sure what that
Yeah.
amount is. I know we are trying to cover like a 10% fund balance. Yes.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
But I thought I thought the money that we had to cover this gap was separate from that 10% fund balance. That was my understanding when we looked at the budget.
Well, so the fund balance, the minimum fund balance of 10% is only somewhat related to your cash flow, because cash flow it relates to when cash goes in and out, and your fund balance is like on a modified accrual basis, like as a specific point of time after you pay all your bills, what surplus you have. So there is a little bit of a disconnect between those two. And so having a 10% fund balance is partially true, that it's partially based upon making sure that you are attaining your cash flow needs, but also that has to do a lot with with what the bondholders are going to want to see and your bond ratings and things like that. So I see that only as moderately connected to this conversation. And there are other inputs to that fund balance discussion that also need to be really reviewed as well with that. It's kind of a bigger scope than just the cash flow part. Does that help?
Maybe, can I ask just an ask of you and then I can have us move on from this? Would it be possible to get back to me or back to us and tell us, was there some kind of separate like line item within the budget separate from our general fund that was used to cover these funds that needed to be paid that we wouldn't get until later in the year? And did we have other money allocated specifically to this outside of the general fund balance? Is that are you understanding what my question is?
So can you pop it in the tracker just to make sure that we get it?
Okay,
covered?
thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions just because I couldn't figure out procedurally on any by Googling. What I see from the board memo that we will need to access these funds this year. That's what we're hearing from the memo, is that the district will need to access this program this year. And so what are the administrative requirements, and are there limits specifically on what we can spend on? I just couldn't see any like regulations or guidance associated with the program online, or couldn't find any. Is it carte blanche? You can have a interest-free loan and use it as you will, but you have to pay us back in 6 months, or is there another level of kind of an administrative burden that comes along with this?
Okay. And Chief Markham did do a lot of this before I got here. But there is a very large and intricate spreadsheet that really lines out every month what you're anticipating to either use or have as a surplus on your cash flow. And then it determines the amount of cash that you're going to need to borrow. And the state reviews that very carefully to make sure that we're not over borrowing or over asking. I've already worked with the state a little bit, and I know that they're a little bit finicky about that. So it's not about what you're using it on, but just making sure that you're calculating those cash flow needs very closely, because they don't want to borrow any more than they have to.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I could see this, I think last year, only 22 of the 180 some districts in Colorado utilized this program, but obviously with the shift in our funding, especially within the last year, such a great percentage coming from local property taxes. I think that's what you're asking, Kenny, because historically, I don't think we've had as much of a period where we don't have enough state funding. The state funding has gotten us through to November, December, January, and then we've had reserves, and that's gotten us through to collection in March, is my understanding. Like, we've been close enough based on that breakdown that we could make it through. But now, since such a greater swing is going to come from local property taxes, we're going to have a much larger gap.
That is what I was asking, but I also have it somewhere from a conversation. I remember where we were sitting, and I think you were in that meeting too, Dr. Cole, in Chief Markham's office. And I had asked specifically about like a line item on the budget, and I thought it was more than just reserve funds. I thought there was an extra fund specific towards that.
Remember a separate account.
And so that's where my question comes from.
We'll dig in.
Yeah.
We'll dig in. And I would just name to your question, Director Kuhlenberg, there's a piece of that to me, I really appreciate that Chief Chacoin can respond to the kind of technical how we use it. I will name that one of the things that does feel significant is, and this isn't quite the question you were asking, but it's definitely in my awareness, there is an increased amount of work that maintaining this spreadsheet is going to require from our finance team, far beyond the current capacity of the team. And so we're definitely like this takes a lot more time every month in terms of the reporting and management to execute on this. And is kind of one of those hidden costs of, I mean, it's a great program. You get to do this to manage your cash flow, but it is significant in terms of the reporting. And it's just something that we haven't staffed for previously. And so we're definitely grappling with the realities of being able to, like, you all approving it, understanding it is a first step. Us having the capacity to implement and execute, of course, we're going to figure it out, but it'll have implications for the team's capacity. And we're going to have to address that as we move forward and try to weigh that in terms of our staffing model.
And is there a maximum amount that we could ask for? Because I guess I can foresee a time in the future when our local property taxes continue to increase as the overall share of our budget. Like right now we're at 75%, which feels huge. And that gap, it just feels like that gap could get larger and larger for us. And I don't know what our monthly expenditures are, but 7.5 million, I'm sure does not cover multiple months. And so I'm guessing this is what we need for this year, but is there a maximum that we could be provided in future years if we were to need more?
So that's a really, really, really great question, because I think that has to do a lot with what Dr. Cole is talking about with the additional staff time, is really making sure we monitor our cash flow very, very closely with all of our accounts and making sure that we're tapping into those funds quick enough. And I'm going to need to look and make sure that $7.5 million is going to be enough to get us through, because I may need a second resolution from the board even during this year. So I'm going to need to kind of, this is going to be one of my monitoring points this year as a very important piece, because we just want to make sure that we obviously have cash in the bank at all times. So
yeah, that just doesn't seem like a very large amount. Like I don't even know if that covers a single month. So
we can ask for more this year, but I'm already having conversations with the state to see what those numbers could look like in case there is an additional need.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I think generally speaking, as a district, if our ducks are in a row in our projections and the need is there, and we communicate that on an appropriate time frame with when the E-Trans organization goes to make their larger ask, then it's not the sky's the limit. This isn't like, but as long as it's reasonable, that funding is going to be there. Like if we need to ask for more, and we get that request in time and have the documentation to justify it, the funding will be there.
Okay.
Especially when you think about the actual amounts they're asking for across the state for all these larger districts that are similar.
Right.
So it's, as long as we get our ducks in a row.
Well, that's, I could see totals are like 425 million were requested last year. Over 22 districts, there have got to be some large funds being requested. So, okay.
Yep.
That was all I had. We have 5 minutes of open discussion. If anyone has any other questions, comments, and then we will vote.
Just real quick, does this pot of money legislation have a sunset?
I believe it's until they choose to revoke it. So it's just one of those budget things. Yeah. So, but I don't think that they're looking to do that. Yeah.
Funding structure.
Thank you. They would have to change the state finance formula then, because schools wouldn't be able to sustain throughout the school year. I mean, there has to be a stopgap if they're going to put the bulk of funding on local property taxes that aren't collected until the spring. Like there's going to have to be some sort of stopgap, right?
Yeah.
Doing this legislation.
Any other questions, comments from the board? Any intervening motions to amend the resolution? Being none, could you please call the vote?
Director Ramirez,
Aye.
Director Kuhlenberg.
Aye.
Director DeFreitas,
Aye.
Director Titler,
Aye.
Director After.
Aye.
Motion passes. Thank you.
Thank you.
The next business in order is future agenda topic discussions. Director After has proposed a topic related to athletics. And so we will give Director After 2 minutes, and then we'll have 5 minutes of open board discussion to determine if we have enough consensus to give staff direction to add this to a future agenda.
Sure. Thanks. Thanks for the time. I am hoping at some point to get an overview for this board on athletics and activities that are housed and originate from the schools in our district, either in a work session or a board meeting. And I realize I'm the first one in many months doing this process here. So it feels like a bigger ask than I intended it to be. I was thinking I had in mind something similar to the great overview we got on SPED a few months ago in a work session that hopefully I felt like was comprehensive and hopefully not a huge amount of work for the staff. And so I don't want to direct the staff to do anything cumbersome, knowing everything y'all have on your plate. And also at the same time, I think athletics and activities in our district are important and meaningful in the lives of our students and families. And don't have the sense through conversations I've had that there's either a comprehensive strategy or a lot of awareness of what the situation is. And so that's why I have asked questions about the state of athletics in our communities and in our school district, and why I'd be curious to hear more about it from staff. But again, am also sensitive to asking you all to put more on your plate.
And just a note on process, this is the first time we've done this in a while, and this is something that we want to get back into, not just for us as the board to understand how agenda items get put on the agenda or how topics get put on the agenda, but for the public also. And so that we're not one-off, like a single board member directing Dr. Cole to add items. We want to have more of a board discussion related to it so that it can be board direction of, we want to hear more about this. We want staff to use their time in this way.
Okay,
So
that makes
thank
sense.
you. Thank you for being
Yeah.
the first one to
I was
engage
surprised to
in the
see my name
process.
on the agenda. But also, I will say I appreciate the chance because I had took the time to do some research and signed up for a CHASA symposium in Grand Junction on October 28th on rural and small school athletics. So maybe I should go to that and then give the presentation.
Yeah,
I
maybe
don't
you
know.
should do that. And yeah, the goal of the board discussion now is to see if there's board consensus to give direction to staff on, yes, we want to have a work session on this, or no, director after's on an island and nobody else is interested in this right now. Like that's kind of the point of having the public discussion of it. So there's not questions about it, or it doesn't feel like one loud voice is getting their items put on the agenda over other voices. Yeah. Anybody else have input?
A couple of things on that. First of all, yes, I think that would be a great piece of information to receive. I would like to hear about that too. And then I don't know if this is something that can be added to that, or if this is already in the works, or if it's through another committee, or where it comes from. But I'm curious to know about where we stand on pay for coaches also, and where we are in that process. And I don't know if that would be part of this, or if that's through another thing that's already happening, or if we can just get an update on that also.
Yeah, I think that question kind of, for me, illuminates the breadth of this topic.
Yeah.
And how there are so many layered questions related to athletics around like training, hiring, pay, who's involved, equity issues around participation, like all these questions, facilities usage, transportation, like it feels very massive to me. And so I think that if we were, like, I'm comfortable adding an item, I think that I would want us to hone down specifically what we want to hear so that staff knows, like, if it's a total program overview of how athletics works in each of our 14 schools, I think that's probably a lot of staff time. So I think I would want input from Dr. Cole on what that would mean. Or if it's specifically like, what training are coaches receiving? How are we allocating resources, and are we doing that in a way that is fair versus equitable? But I just think there are different questions.
I would name, and I hope it's okay that I jump in with some ideas and context. I appreciate, Director, after your clarification or just explaining that you're interested really around that current state. That's not a lot for us to be able to pool athletic directors to talk about the current state. What are their programs? What are participation levels? what's the number of kids and staff. I would say, and I do think it's helpful if there are particular components or data points that you are interested, that would be really helpful to refine of like, we want to know the coaches' salary schedules and how those have moved. I think I have a lot of very deep questions about how athletics and activities drive towards our strategic goals and initiatives. So much so, and I think one of the really important components is if you think of our strategic plan and you think of the priority students first, which is really about focusing on the lived student experience of our schools. One of the metrics that we're measuring is a question that kids are asked on the Healthy Kids Colorado survey that is registering what % of students say that they participate in sports, clubs, activities. That's really interesting to us in that demographic, because what we see is a real disparity between our students of color and our white students in terms of participation. And so this is like, I'm kind of encapsulating athletics in this bigger question that we're very, very interested in. And it's around all sorts of activities and leadership activities. And we really want to look carefully at representation of students, because our theory of action is that kids who are participating and if are going to have a deeper connection to their school, a stronger sense of belonging, be more invested in their school and thus in their academic achievement and excellence and growth. And so we're starting to really dig in and tracking that metric. And so I would say currently we have an interest in athletics as a driver to that initiative and the outcomes we're trying to see. And so right now, our eyes are absolutely looking at athletics as we are activities and theater and clubs and student leadership to really start to look at and audit student representation across that. I think, so I want to name that like there is a piece of athletics that we care deeply about in terms of strategy right now. Additionally, I would say, and we can totally come and talk about current state, different things that we've leaned in on that are say, this was, for example, the first year that we as a district have had a mandatory coaches orientation. And we just did that August 6th. The athletic directors wanted to do that. Our leadership really supported them. We found the funding to make sure we could stipend coaches for that day. That was really important. We learned a lot in the process of how to do it better. But it was a great first step, because I think we definitely do have some strategy and theory of action around like, if we're doing it, we need to make sure it's safe and we need to make sure that we're following board policy. So there's certainly pieces we can share on current state. I think there's a ton of questions that emerge when we open up, I think, this massive Pandora's box of athletics and what we invest. And I do see a future world in 3 to 5 years where we do something like what we did with safety last year around athletics and activities. What are we in this for? What aligns to our strategic plan? What does our community want from us in terms of athletics? So I do have that hesitation of like, oh gosh, how big are we opening this given staff capacity? But I also want to name that there are pieces of our strategic plan that we're very interested in looking at it through athletics. And I think a current state update that was very simple in terms of what are we doing? What are our challenges? What are the bright spots? Wouldn't be a burden. And I actually think that our athletic directors would love the opportunity to meet with this board and share those pieces. And I think then I can always have that voice of like, and how far are we going to go? Like, let's be really thoughtful and measured about what we're going to solve right now.
It seems like there's board support for that.
And can you touch on the piece about salaries? Is there anything in the works to deal with that? Because I know that was a big concern.
Well, I will name that the board in our 24-25 budget, you all approved a 10% increase to coaches' salaries. They hadn't been adjusted in, I think, 3 years. And so when we moved other salary schedules, we hadn't moved that. And so we did push that. You approved that increase for the 24-25 school year. But we haven't, in terms of doing a big step back and comparables, that would be another task to run that out.
I do just want to keep us focused on the question of if we want this as a future agenda item instead of getting into the weeds.
That makes sense. Yeah, thank you.
I think we
Yes.
could talk about it forever.
Yes, but at the
Totally.
discretion of the capacity that you see for your staff. I personally knowing that the year started, we're not going to make changes this year, that if there are other priorities that need to get addressed first, I would suggest finding the time that you see it working best with the available schedules that your staff has, instead of like, it doesn't have to be next week. It doesn't have to be next month in my mind, at least.
Director After, do you have a timeline that you wanted to see this in, or would you be okay if we fit it into the year-long agenda cycle and
That's fine.
where there's no breaks? Is that clear direction? Dr. Wall? Great. The next business in order is board updates and appreciations, and we've combined these last two items. I'll begin with Director Ramirez. We can turn off mics.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. I just want to take a second to appreciate all our teachers and staff. Tonight was back to school at the high school, and I know that everyone's busy just welcoming families back to school. So a huge shout out of appreciation to everyone who has kicked off the new school year and is getting just accustomed to their new little faces. I know for me, it's been kind of crazy with some of these field trips the kids are going on, and I'm just so appreciative of all the time and scheduling and organizing that our staff takes to make it possible. On an update, I just wanted to mention, obviously, like Superintendent Cole mentioned earlier today about us having the Federal Relations Network from CASB here and having our legislators in town. Super excited to be able to host them and to have the opportunity to talk about our housing program, but also just about all the amazing things we're doing. So I am really looking forward to having them here, and I think it'll be a really important moment for us to be able to highlight some of the pain points that we feel as a district, and some of the issues that we're dealing with out here in our Valley corridor. And then I just wanted to make sure I made a comment about two things. One is a follow-up to maybe scheduling a work session to debrief on the town hall that Superintendent Cole and I were able to have this summer at the end of last school year. And a form that we briefly talked about creating for teachers or families who had questions. And so I'll make sure to add those to our board tracker, because I think those two would be really important things for us to try to create or to schedule in the coming future before it gets too late into the school year. All right, thanks everyone.
Thank you. Director DeFreitas?
Board report for me is I missed some labor relations committees due to conflicts and schedules, but I'm looking forward to participating in that committee moving forward. I'm glad that that's all been calendared so efficiently, and I appreciate the work of the staff for that. And I also appreciate all of the work that was done over the summer, whether it was in the administrative office, making sure that positions were filled, leadership was clear on next steps, or whether it was classroom teachers, making sure that they're set up for the year. I know that there's a huge variety of work that gets done even when we are all out of session, and there's just no way to name everybody who was a part of that, but generally appreciating that that shows the dedication of our educators and our leaders in this district. Thanks.
Director Tyler?
A few updates on some different committees. The first one is about the housing committee that has been meeting. We met and had our first meeting of the year, and there was sort of one of the major outcomes of this was try to figure out what was the housing committee going to focus on this year. And there were 4 major focuses. The big one was about what we're doing towards moving towards any kind of ownership model for staff, but we're talking about putting that one on hold until we try to get some kind of 10-year plan going that we're in the process of doing with housing. And so it was decided that was like overwhelmingly the biggest issue that came up, but we're sort of putting that on the back burner for right now until we get that 10-year plan going, as we're have that RFP out for that. But three other things were talked about. One was the rent structure for what we're doing for our rental housing. And it was a discussion about how as salaries raise, so do rent raise, and so does childcare raise. And so what happens to our people just staying where they were, or is it really a benefit? And so there's going to be one sort of group within that that's going to be working on rent and seeing where do we think, and giving bringing to the board their thought on what should happen in rent for it. Another one was a group was talking about our Basalt end of our valley and how Basalt continues to lose staff to further down valley. And that's mostly dependent upon people being able to be closer to work. And then the staff housing that we do have isn't necessarily very much in Basalt, and it's mostly down valley. And so in lotteries, is there something that can be done to give more points towards people who are up in Basalt? And then there was questions about, is there going to be some kind of stipend possibility towards that too, or paying for all the mileage that people are having to go up there as they're losing staff? And that was the second area. And then a third area that was brought up was talking about what is happening in the units that we are renting out, and do we need to have some better paperwork follow through with people who are checking in and checking out of houses. It seems like that's maybe been a little bit lax, and how people are checking in and whether expectations are being held of how the units should be looking and being kept up. And so there's going to be a group who will be working on that. The next thing to report on is Meadowwood. And I know we just as a board got a little bit of an update from Chief Baumfach on that. And so yes, that by the middle, the 20th or 23rd of September are dates that we're looking at trying to do a ribbon cutting and having people move into the two buildings that are still not open, but it's getting very close there. And I just wanted to give a shout out as part of that to the great job that FCI has done there. They've been very professional. They've been very upbeat. They've been very knowledgeable. The whole team has just really worked very well to keep us from, after our original delay at the beginning that had something to do with a water line that was a part that had to be special and couldn't be anything done with that. We've really kept on schedule, and they so I just wanted to give a shout out to the people working at Meadowwood and FCI, especially Christian, Chad, Rob, and Ben, who are FCI people there, workers there. And then also to our own Chief Ben Baumfach, who is there on a weekly basis working there. And so many decisions are coming at him and having to make many decisions in this at the snap of the fingers and say, yes, let's go with this or that. And he's just done a really great job leaning in and using his resources and doing a great job as our guide for our district there. And then I want to talk about, as BOCES, we're having our first fall meeting as the BOCES board. Our last meeting in the spring was canceled. We're having a little bit of a difficulty as a BOCES getting membership, getting people on the board. We're still having vacant positions. So that's one of the things that we're trying to work with the board, is really trying to get people to represent so we can have a quorum and so we can do the work that we need to do. A positive that's coming out of BOCES is that we have a contract that we're ready to, an MOU for our services that we have with them, which is very important for us because it's sort of been pulling teeth a little bit of trying to get details in the past a little bit. And this is sort of just puts into writing what our deals are, what are our services, how they're being delivered in a way that has a lot more accountability to it. So this MOU is a very positive step forward with us. And then the other thing that we're really looking for doing with BOCES is just really trying to define our services that we're wanting as a board. And instead of BOCES saying, here's things we can offer you, we're wanting to try to figure out more BOCES, can you do this for us? Instead of them saying, these are things that we have to offer for you. So And then as my shout out and my thanks is, as we start a new school year, I just really want to give a thank you to the teachers. It's such an overwhelming job for teachers at the beginning of the year. There's so much information that floods teachers in so many different capacities, and from having to do paperwork and get to know names and get to know people and get to know behaviors and try to set up systems. But more than anything, the part that I want to appreciate from teachers is all the interactions that happen in a day that you, as teachers, there's conversations that need to happen in ways to promote the wellness of the students and the behavior and the making them better people. And it's just so fleeting as a teacher of you hear something and then you get home and you're like, wow, that's something that still needs to be talked about. And it's just so much swirling, I know, in the teachers' heads all the time. And it's just such a big job that is like never ending. And so for all that extra brain space that is being used up, not only when teachers are at school, but later when they get home and are realizing all the things that need to be done and didn't get done, I want to just say thank you for that hard work.
Thank you. Director After?
Great, thanks. I unfortunately had to miss the first finance committee meeting with our new colleague. And so sorry about that. It actually looks like the September one was rescheduled, I think probably because of Labor Day, and I'm going to be out of town for that one too. So might need to just check in on seeing if we could bump that. But thanks to all the hardworking folks of the district who kept the lights on and kept plans moving over the summer. I know that can probably feel like a bit of a grind while other folks are off on vacation. So really appreciate that. And like Kenny said, thanks to all the teachers who show up so happily and delighted and through all the hard work to kick off the school year. And special shout out to the llama that was present at CRES on the first day. I hope everyone saw that. Oh, Tina. Yeah, that was many days of delight. We wish you well, Tina.
Thanks. I don't have any additional updates. I feel like you get my updates via policy committee. DAC is looking for new leadership. The DAC chair stepped down. They're having their first meeting in September. So if any of you know anyone who would be a great fit on the DAC, please send them that way. There will be information going out in the newsletter this week. Yeah, next week. Yeah, the next newsletter. There will be information going out for recruitment. And I'm hopeful that that group can recruit and continue the great work that they've been doing, because they've done a lot of work to lay a foundation and build out school SACs. And I'm really appreciative of everything they've done. And they've got some committed members. And I think getting more people on board would be amazing. And it's a great way for people to get involved and really get into kind of the nitty gritty that we get into as a board in terms of budgeting and the UIP and other topics. So if you have any ideas, please send them along. For my appreciation this week, I wanted to give a specific shout out to the staff at Basalt Elementary School. I'm starting this year with all 3 of my kids in one building, which is amazing. I'll get 1 year of that. But for anyone that doesn't know, Basalt is a 50-50 dual language program. And so at our orientation, at our Boohoo breakfast after dropping off kids in kindergarten, at every step of the way, there were equal opportunities in both English and Spanish. And there was a really concerted effort to ensure that all families were welcome and taken care of. And I'm just so appreciative of the programming that my kids get to be a part of, and the amazing committed staff and teachers that are there and that are driving up from Glenwood and beyond to be a part of that school and the amazing things that are happening there. So a special shout out to them for going above and beyond and doing everything twice. If there is no further business and no objection, this meeting will be adjourned. It is 8:29 p.m.